been incredibly lucky. Coming into a family-owned business is just a different world. The key is people. That's why I joined Moda.
It's so important not to rush, make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Real estate is real estate.
I completely agree. There's always that phrase, paralysis by analysis.
People making decisions looking into the UK and going, do I really want to invest here?
What's your process for identifying and selecting investment partners?
It's all about a long-term relationship. We want to be really open with people.
Build to rent is by definition something which takes a deep level of understanding and trust.
And I think that's right.
If you could reinvent anything in the real estate sector, what would it be?
I think I'll be controversial around this one.
So, welcome back to our final episode of Reinventing Real Estate. This is a very prominent one, as we have Michael Old here from Moda Living, corporate finance and structuring there. And what we're really excited about with Michael is he comes from very much the financial background. He's going to give us a real insight into kind of the investment side. And having joined Moda only a few months ago, he's got a really fresh and exciting new perspective. So we are very pleased to have you here, and we'd love to hear more from your perspective. Obviously, my introduction only scratches the surface of what you do and what you've done to get to this point, but we'd love to take it back to how you first set out in the industry and the steps you took to get here.
Thank you very much. Listen, the journey's been actually very long, 30 odd years in the industry now. Started off from very humble starting points. Selling office space from a porter cabin in the middle of the metro centre was a highlight at the start. I was coming out of college into a brilliant kind of lifestyle. Failed. Markets took over, and throughout the 30 years there's been 4 or 5 different times where the markets have moved, jobs have become more uncertain, and I was unlucky to come out in the middle of one. Moved down to London mainly to play sport, failed miserably at that as well, so I had to work. Got seconded into banking, so did 14 years of lending, and then since actually that, 10 years of investment banking. So I've done an awful lot of things, and coming out into Moda is an incredible opportunity. I'm incredibly lucky. I have been throughout my kind of 30 years. I've landed on my feet a number of times, and the industry's changed an awful lot, but it's always been one of great fun. Great people, I think, is the key, and I've been incredibly lucky to be around a lot of characters. And going into now, at the end of my life of working, after being in large corporates throughout 30 years, coming into a family-owned business is just a different world. And it's something that I've wanted to do for a long time. And the kind of opportunity of coming into Moda, into a sector which is buoyant, growing, and Moda being in the position that they are in terms of growth is huge. So I'm loving the opportunity. Hopefully I can help them with some perspectives I've gained over 30 years. And I hope we can have a decent kind of chat about it over the next 30 minutes, hour.
Brilliant. And then I know we spoke briefly outside, but I think it's quite nice for the audience to hear about, I suppose, how even the way that sport and networking has played a way into your career and how that's helped you. It's such a people business, and we always say this, especially now when different technologies are coming through. So it'd be really nice to hear some of the anecdotes you shared with me about how that's come back around.
Sure, yeah. Sport's been a major part of my life. I've been incredibly fortunate. My dad played England rugby. My uncle was an international sportsman as well. I spent my childhood being thrown out of bars at the age of 3 or 4, and hanging around in changing rooms. Yeah, I had a wonderful life. I played myself. I was never as good as them. I tried very hard. The number of networks and people I've met, and I still actually meet who I played against, who are friends of friends, and things, I wouldn't have got to where I got without those people. And I've been incredibly lucky to actually do it. It's something that I'd encourage hugely. It's something in the industry, I would say there's a few things I haven't enjoyed. And one of those being in investment banking, watching talented sports people, really outgoing people who've played sport all their life at college, at school, loved it. They go into an investment banking thing and they're expected to work. And they drop out and they miss that kind of social side. I think that's one of the bits of the industry that has changed for the worst, actually, because I think it does make you a better person having things outside of the industry. I know the world's trying to change back again now. it has gone through actually those times. But for me personally, I'm a daft lad from the northeast of England. I met a lot of people. I like people. And I think that's one of the key actually things in the industry is doing that. And as you say, some of the anecdotes around sport and business, they're all very similar. There's a lot of things you follow. We were just talking about it earlier on, the rule changes in rugby. It's stifling people being creative. I think a lot of things, and we'll talk about my kind of bugbears around IRRs and things later. IRRs stifle a lot of other things because why you're trying to invest, what you're trying to do. Rugby is the same thing. If you play actually by a game plan, how do you create things? How do you make decisions? It's kind of very good. As I said, I've been incredibly fortunate in it. I would encourage it through anybody listening to this who has stepped out of sport or is turning things down because of work, find a way. You never know who you're going to meet.
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting, isn't it, talking about that, being able to express your personality and make a stamp on what the sport you play and the people you interact with. Well, that actually resonates quite strongly with business as well and flexibility around that. Hugely, and I've seen it stamp out, but it's coming back again now. I think people are encouraging it more just because they know people have to have a life outside of work. We've been through some big ups, some kind of difficult times, but family is important, life outside is important, sport is important, or art or whatever you are involved in. Find a way because you never know who you're going to meet. And for you to have personal time, we spend a lot of time working.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I think, one of the limited benefits of what's come out of the COVID pandemic, I think, is the fact that people have definitely redressed the balance slightly, and there's more of a focus, isn't there, on that. And I think that probably benefits work as well. If you've got happier minds and happier people with a bit more balance, and you're going to get better results.
You are, absolutely.
And also just, I think, opening your eyes and ears to the world and being inspired by other things actually helps translate into work, bringing fresh ideas, bringing a new perspective. And there's real value in that. Just being out there, seeing and doing, you come across things that then inspire you at the office that you wouldn't have thought about if you weren't on the tube going here or playing sport there. It's all those things that actually, as you say, stimulate the creativity in people's minds and makes businesses interesting and not just formulaic. And
real estate is still a people's thing. It's all about people. And when you interview people, everybody nowadays seems incredibly bright, very well qualified, incredibly good. They can do an Excel spreadsheet a hell of a lot better than I can. But I'm looking for the people who have done something, who have something slightly different, who can go out and meet people. They're the future people who are going to take over businesses, who can manage people. I was very lucky, as well as playing sport. I actually managed in sport. It was a bit I absolutely loved. Playing was always the optimum, of course, but managing was great because it's just being around people. And it's not telling people what to do, it's learning. It's learning what people can do, how to get the best out of them. And that was the key for me, and I've translated a lot of that into my life as well.
I think it's really interesting. You say you've managed and you've played. Would you say that one's been more beneficial than the other in terms of what you've taken into the business world, or is it a mix of both?
I think if you look at my early side, it was knowing people, and playing side definitely worked around that. And in sport, you have to create your own personality. If you're part of teams, especially, we're talking about sport here. I think it's the same across anything that you do outside of work. If it's artistry or music, as my wife's into, you go through things and you meet people, and you're always meeting people. And I think that was the start of my path here, is knowing people and meeting people and knowing how to be around people. But then I think as it went on, management came in later in life, luckily, and it was fascinating to be around different groups of people, bringing them into a camp and trying to get them onto a rugby pitch, in this case, 4 or 5 days later to play an international rugby game. It was fascinating to see how you gelled people, and you learnt a lot each time you actually did it. That worked one time, but it didn't work the next time. Why? Different personalities, different team makeup, and you ended up selecting on the back of those makeups. So I think that was fascinating more than anything else. But certainly, as I said, the key for me is having something outside of work, having something you can do. And when I started in work, was incredibly social. I'm not sure how sociable it is quite at the moment. I think that's one thing that has changed. It's not quite as social. A lot of things were actually worse then, don't actually get me wrong, the social side I think has dropped off a little bit because everybody's busier.
Mm.
People have more in their lives, and I hope that is more in their lives.
Yeah, it's really nice actually, that point you said about managing people is not just telling people what to do, it's actually listening and learning what their strengths are and what they're good at, and using that almost in the same way with the sport kind of analogy to create a really effective team where you're pulling on everyone's strengths that complement one another. And I think perhaps when people step into those managerial roles, they're more focused on delegating and giving people tasks, but actually not listening to the skills. So that's a really nice point actually about taking the time to learn, what people are best at and where they're best placed as a result.
Yeah, and I think it brings me back to actually Moda. The reason Johnny Caddick and I have been speaking, and Tony Brooks for a while, is I've come in, the developer operators. They're brilliant at it. I've learnt a lot in the couple of months I've been there in terms of that I've not had to touch in the past. But I look at it in a slightly different way to actually them, and that's what they've seen, and that's why they actually want me in the door.
Yeah.
It just adds a different viewpoint, a different approach, a different set of skills. And that's what always makes a team. I agree with you 100%. That's exactly what it is. It's about creating that. And I think the other big thing that I've been kind of lucky about is, I've been around some very good managers, bosses, senior people. I've also had some people who have been brilliant, who've come in at junior levels. They're brilliant. They're very bright, they're very focused, but they're all, to your point, different.
Yeah.
I like that difference. You can't create, a rugby team out the same shape, albeit the rules are moving it that way, but we'll not actually get into that here. You've got to have different personalities. You've got to have different people. You've got to have different skill sets, and people have to listen to those skill sets and understand those skill sets. Nobody knows everything. And you always realise that. You don't know everything. There's always someone brighter than you, as I've always realised. But chances are with there's 3 or 4 of you, you can probably add it all together to be brighter than actually them. So I think that's a key point.
That is very true. And then I suppose from your background in banking, what do you feel as though other kind of beside that personable networking point, do you feel like you converted skills over into what you're doing now?
Absolutely. There's massive kind of learning curves. As I said, development is a highly skilled game. I don't know any of it. I've realised I've done actually banking and advisory for years and lending. And I've lent on developments across the world, Chicago and other places, multi-million pounds. And I didn't understand it. I could honestly sit actually back and say I knew how it worked, and I had the right advisors to put in place those blocks. But I don't know roughly how it works, but you needed those advisors to put in those blocks. The key is getting the key thing. But I think it's the same across on my side. I've been very lucky to have worked across multiple disciplines, multiple jurisdictions. You learn from every single deal, and it's about applying those individual learning points. If you come across a thing, I did actually that a while ago, that might work, or that might work, or you ask someone else about their opinion. And I think that's the key. Bringing that skill base across is important, and having the lending side, having the advisory, having the underlying real estate side. Listen, I've done 30 years of real estate. I've never done anything else. I'm not sure I could actually do anything else. I think it's as limited as that. It is just applying individual points to things to another skill base.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in terms of, I suppose, across your career, are there any, I'm sure there are, individuals that jump out that really influenced you, mentored you, helped you along the way, or where did you get that from?
There's a number who've influenced me. I'm not sure I should talk about them though. Now, there's always been kind of characters from the first actually job I got and working with DTZ up in Newcastle, who were a bunch of characters. On a Wednesday night, if the tune were actually playing at home, everybody disappeared off into the bathrooms. All the directors went off, put on their black and white shirts at 4:30 and went out for a couple of beers. It was brilliant fun, but it was just learning to actually get into the working environment was the key. And that's one of the key things I see actually now with people coming into the industry, and I think it's the same across most industry, is learning how to work, how to be in a different environment. And the working from home thing is a bigger debate, and it comes into the Moda product as well for us, and something we actually think about a lot in terms of how do we look after people working from home? How do we make their experience better?
Yeah.
So we've got a lot of that to actually think about. But in terms of influences, first kind of banking jobs, I was very lucky to be put alongside people who knew more about it than I did. I was brought in as a director at RBS. I'd got no banking experience, but I was brought in at quite a senior level. Why? Because I knew a lot of people. Simply, Kate, I knew a lot of people. I knew a bit of real estate. And I was put alongside a guy called Chris Canham, who's still around at Lloyds Bank now, I believe. He was a banker through and through. We actually went around with each other all the time. He knew far more than I did. And he was there to make sure I didn't really do anything wrong. Basically, he did all the work, I did all the talking.
It boils back, though, to what you said earlier, that dovetailing and working with people with different skill sets and abilities is how you end up with the best results.
It is, and it also works across to clients. I remember working on a deal, one of my first banking deals, lending on a hotel portfolio. And I remember the client sat opposite me, lovely guy, and we were negotiating a loan deal. And he suckered me in through negotiation tactics I'd never seen. And afterwards, he took me out for a beer, showed what a good guy he was, and said, listen, I'm not going to do all that. Here we go. We had a conversation about it, and he suckered me in beautifully. That I learnt a lot off the back of that, and I got very into negotiation skills and how things work, because he was brilliant. But he was a gentleman and said, I'm not going to be stupid. There's others who probably have gone further than actually that. But you learn from mentors internally, and I could name 20 of them. But you also learn from clients who you get on with very well. I've learned a lot through. I can remember doing the Tritax IPO. I'd never done an IPO before. I sat at Jefferies going through it on the journey with the kind of Tritax management, James and Colin, going out on road shows with them. It was an incredible experience. You learned an awful lot about what investors wanted, what they were going to do. And that learning experience was huge and a massive kind of thing in my life, and also a massive deal.
Yeah, it sounds like you really take a lot of benefit out of being out of your comfort zone and constantly learning on the job.
But if you're not, then you're not actually learning. I think learning's a great thing, and we can all sit in our comfort zones. And it's always nice being in your comfort zone. If you can be slightly outside your comfort zone, but with good people, or know you have backup or you have support, that's a great place. Yeah. And I've been really lucky in the industry that I think everywhere I've ever been, I'm always a phone call away from someone who can help me or advise me or walk in. I think that's one of the biggest things I've always had. I've never pushed limits.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to do what we call is our 2 truths, 1 lie. I know I spoke to you briefly about this one. Don't worry, it's not too hard. I'm sure you'll get it.
I'm not so sure. Monday morning, after all.
Yeah. So I will read out 3 statements. 2 are truths, 1 is a lie, and we can just have a chat about which one we think it might be.
It's a team effort between
yourself, is it?
Yourself and me. Yeah.
I get to actually know the answers.
Okay.
So statement number one is, it typically takes a lag of up to 18 months between an interest rate change to have its full effect on house prices. And statement number two is, other factors like economic growth, consumer confidence, availability of financing, housing supply, demographics, and government policy also significantly impact housing markets. And the third statement is, rising interest rates will always lead to falling house prices.
I think for the first one, it typically takes a lag of up to 18 months between an interest rate change and its full effect on house prices. I can definitely believe that there's a lag, and 18 months would feel like a sensible amount of time to elapse before those effects start getting felt.
I agree. I think it does take a time. But every cycle we actually go through, and especially ones that are as extreme as we've been through, I think it's going to change. But I think 18 months would probably be a decent average. But I think there's obviously it depends how quick it goes up or how quick it falls. Yeah. At the moment, the kind of volatility is going to probably have quicker effects. And as we've seen, anybody writes anything in the news, everything shifts.
Yeah.
And that's on the back of the press and on the back of news. I think there's a lot more knee-jerk now than there probably was, but I think 18 months is probably about a kind of good average.
Yeah, it's interesting you say about there's more knee-jerk now over the years, and I think obviously one of the key factors in that is the ability and the speed at which news is reported, and you look at social media, how fast things can spread and get around.
Yeah, I spoke to someone probably about a year ago when we were in a lot of volatility after Russia had invaded Ukraine, and I asked him, what do you think the biggest effects on the market? And this was probably trust kind of time as well. And he said, it's a third down to Russia. Ukraine energy bills were going up. It was all volatile. And we've got a war on our doorstep. That's always going to hurt. And he said, a third of it's down to our politicians and global politicians, actually, the uncertainties around that. And he said a third is down to the British press.
Yeah.
And the way we sensationalise every little bit of news. Absolutely. House price falls, great. It's not. It's minuscule. Yeah. House price fall from what? What's an asking price of a house? I think we're a lot more reactive now in the market than we've ever been. Plus, to your point, I think the press has got more and more power and looking to sensationalise every single story. And I think we're a lot more reactive to actually that. But to answer the question, I think 18 months on average over what I can see is probably the right kind of lag, yeah.
But it's really interesting as well. So you just touched upon what you said there, that you're talking about other factors, consumer confidence, the media. That leads into our second point, that other factors like economic growth, consumer confidence, availability of financing. Those are all key elements which impact housing markets, and it's becoming more and more acutely felt.
And we're actually seeing it a lot at kind of Moda, of course, sitting in there on a rental-only basis. Demand is good. I know our current BTR stock is at the upper end of the kind of rental levels, as you would see it. There's a lot of benefits included in that rent, by the way. We probably average about £400 or so of costs within that, such as gym memberships and other things which are embedded in that, which is why it's very kind of good on an overall basis. But you look at that, and the rental market is going strongly. How far can it go is a big question. Cost of living crisis is out there, but then I walk around here I'm sure here at the weekend in kind of Shoreditch was in the decent weather, the bars were full, the restaurants were packed. I'm sure you couldn't get a table. Cost of living crisis in certain areas. I think it's a different way people look at things. And this is why when you talk about house price increases and things like this, 20% of UK people have a mortgage in the UK, 20-25%. I think I saw a stat the other day. People are living more to actually live and earning more to live than they are to save.
Absolutely.
And so I think all these stats are all very good, but there's an underlying thing that they do obviously have an effect. But I think economic policy is different, or should we say economic effects are different back when I was a kid than they are now.
Absolutely. I think that therefore, if you do, the first two are truths, I think.
I think we've got to go false last year.
We'll have to go false, for rising interest rates always lead to falling house prices.
Which actually isn't true, because I have lived through those.
You are correct.
That was good news. I was under pressure.
Breaking a sweat, but we're good. No, and just to build on one of your points, I think that is really interesting in terms of the kind of build to rent space is that when we're talking about kind of millennials, Gen Z, Gen X, there is less of an emphasis, I would say maybe more post-COVID actually, about freeing up some of your disposable income, not to be putting into a bank account to start saving to buy somewhere. There isn't that emphasis, I think, anymore. And we've largely got used to a lot of kind of subscription models through our lifestyle, paying X amount a month for Netflix or leasing a car rather than owning a car if you have a car at all. So it's things like that where, today you have comfort, but actually you're not looking at 50 years' time, you're not looking at 30 years' time. So the adjustments in terms of how people or younger people want to live, I think is also shifting that trend, not just from a solely economic, but from a preference point of view.
And it is preference.
Yeah.
I think that's the key. It's aspirational.
Yeah.
A lot of people are aspirational. When you look at the people who are taking our units across the 5 sites we have up and running and pre-letting across the other 2, these are at the upper end of the rental spectrums in their respective cities. There's a lot of young people. A lot of students, actually.
Yeah.
80-year-old people in these units as well, because they like being around the vibrancy of the units, the community that Moda creates and spends a lot of time on. I think your point is absolutely right, though. As a father to an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, I don't understand them. I'm sorry, I've just given up. It is an amazing thing. Back in certainly my kind of parents' day, when interest rates were 15%, when they put them up, they paid the mortgage and they put actually money aside. We didn't go out for dinner. We didn't do those kind of things. They saved money.
Yeah.
And that's probably been passed on to my kind of generation. But I think the new actually generation is different. And we have people at Moda who are more of that kind of generation, luckily. We spend a lot of time looking at that and understanding how it is. People are money savvy. Don't get me wrong. They're as money savvy as anybody has been. It's just different priorities. We don't want to put our lives on hold for a year.
Yes.
Back in our day, we'd have thought a year, we'll save for a year and then it'll be okay.
Yeah.
Different mindset. You're not putting my life on hold for a year. There is limits on spending. There always is. And as kind of interest rates go up, then there's always that issue afterwards that people have borrowed, that they have gone into that and they do get themselves in actual trouble. And there's always a bit of a lag on actually that and a nervousness. But I think there is limits on actual rental levels. I think there is limits on house pricing and where it goes. But as I say, the key I think about is providing value for actual money across anything you do. If a restaurant if it produces brilliant food at a high price, people will go because they want that experience. If they produce good food at a cheaper price, people get with a brilliant atmosphere, people will go.
Yeah.
It's about creating what actually works in the environment and understanding that it's going to change.
Yeah. I think actually just going back a bit, you touched on an interesting point that you've got older people in their 70s and living in your schemes. I think that it's important to note that, particularly from a build to rent point of view, that there's a wider audience out there. And actually what we're talking about here in terms of the experiential economy and of the younger people, that's quite infectious. And I think that there's a lot of older people who are buying into it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think it's a great thing. I love the retirement home thing. And that's actually, funnily enough, driven by my parents. They've lived in Northumberland for 35 years, rurally. They decided to move down to Harrogate into an apartment. It's not in a retirement rental place. It's an apartment. But their life has changed up materially. They can lock the front door and go off on holiday for a week. They can come and visit us for a week. They can go, and they've just got a brilliant lifestyle now. They had a great lifestyle there, but for them as a couple into a new environment, it's been brilliant. That kind of retirement for actually living is certainly something we're going to look at in the future. But I really enjoy the fact that we've got such a mix in our buildings and the fact that you see these older people in these buildings and they love it. They love being engaged in that community. They don't want to get old. They just want to be part of the community. They join in things, all the events, and people love them. And I think that's really key, is being able to get a product that goes across the board. And where I see a massive future in actually Moda as well, and we've just announced something with kind of Aviva in actually Birmingham. I do the city centre regen opportunities, and we all talk about multi-use. I really like the multi-use thing across actually living, having BTR alongside retirement, alongside PBSA. Why? Because we can be a lot better with the facilities that we put in there. You'll find that students won't use the gym early, but because they're still actually getting in from actually the night out, I hope, they won't use the gym early in the morning, but the residents of the BTR will.
Yeah.
So being smart around producing great facilities, being smart about multi-use on those facilities creates a lower build cost, but gets you a much better facility for the building. So I really like that multi-use. Of course, there'll be some offices, I would have thought, and some retail around that. But I think the multi-use living, separate buildings, typically, I would hope. But I like that kind of idea because I think working alongside that works. I think it works.
That's quite a compelling point as well. I think everyone keeps asking about how can you monetize ESG policy. Well, you're taking a pretty strong kind of benefit there from a social perspective in terms of multi-generational living in the same areas, everyone getting the same benefits, but you're also getting operational efficiencies there, as you just touched upon, by people using the facilities at different times just because of the human nature of who they are.
I think it's the learning curve that you go on when you speak to the Moda guys and you go through one of their first schemes and you go around one of their last schemes. The quality is brilliant across the board. Don't get me wrong, they're brilliant buildings to actually live in. But if you look closely and you see the evolution of the amenities, there's an evolution. And the great amenities across the board, but it's slight tweaks all the time. It's slightly, we're learning from that. We're learning who's using this when, we're using who's using this. And it's the working from home thing. A lot of stuff during the day, we should provide desks and space for people, because people don't like locking themselves in a room and working themselves. People do need people generally. And so having that space, but then what can you create from that space later on when people aren't sitting at their desk working? What can you do with it? And I think that's really smart. So working across, at the moment it's been BTR things. Over in the future, I hope there's that kind of evolution, that there's multi-living sectors in the same area where you can create really smart, efficient things. But the one thing I expected walking into Moda, but I've been really surprised by the detail and the time that is spent on it, is the community side.
Yeah.
It's building communities.
Yeah.
And our building at Hove is going to open at the end of the year. They've been running art competitions for its local artists for the last couple of years. They've spent a lot of time engaging with the community. As soon as we get a planning, we're engaged with the community. And that's one of the great things about actually Moda that I've found. It's a full service. It goes from buying the land through to operating it. We're involved all the way through. Therefore, we have to live it. We have to breathe it. We have to buy into it. We have to, everything. Yeah. And we want the local community to actually buy in, and you're fitting into an existing community and hopefully engaging with it and making it better, I would hope, for actually most people in that.
Yeah. That's interesting as well, because I think there are ways to which people are trying to catch up with where BTR has got to and all that it's offering people, and viewing people as customers rather than tenants and that type of thing. But it's interesting to think about that kind of multi-living environment, because actually that really goes back to the traditional way that people live, which is you go up a street and not everyone on that street is 25 or 35. They're all ages. They all use that local gym, or a lot use their local gym or community centre. And again, they're sharing it all ages, and it works, and it has worked for a very long time. So that's a really nice point about, taking things and innovating into the future, but also harking back and having respect for, how communities have worked up to this point.
And it's really important to integrate into that.
Yeah.
I think it's really important, because it's probably taken years for that community to evolve into what it is. Probably tens of years, probably 20s and 30s of years. We're trying to turn up, typically quite a large building on average 500, 600 units. These aren't small buildings, and they do tend to dominate a neighbourhood. But hopefully the community accepts that and grows actually with us. And we spend an awful lot of time on that. I'm really impressed with actually the guys doing all the community engagement. The ESG tag as an advisor was huge. Sitting in Moda, I reckon that's what most people spend most of their time on, the ESG stuff that we're doing, from helping people save actually money on bills through Utopia, which is monitoring rooms and monitoring how much they can tell if you've got your window open and things like this. It's not the big brother thing. It's just more, how can we help you?
Optimising.
How can we optimise things? How can we do this to the common areas and switching off things and working through to the design of buildings to be the most optimal we can be, recycling, green energy, buying in bulk so we can reduce energy costs and usage. We're looking at lots and lots of different things constantly. The heart of it, we can do all the building stuff because that's all just normal thing. The key is people.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I suppose, looking at BTR from an investment point of view, what have you been seeing that investors are looking for when getting into BTR? And is there a kind of checklist? And do you think that's changed over the last 18 months?
I think it's a sector that hasn't been understood. When you go over to the US, and I'm sure you guys have been, I remember going over there 10 or so years ago, going to the big multi-family guys. And it was eye-opening, seeing them walking around with an iPad in a 800 unit thing, and there was live pricing going on the screen as they let things. This is amazing. And you walked in, and there was the concierge, and you thought, this is brilliant. Why aren't we doing this? It's very hard to do. The operators in our market are very good. Moda, I think, are extremely good, but there's a lot of other good guys out there. Everybody's evolving, everybody's finding a way. And I think, to answer one of your points there, I think if investors are looking at the market, it is about getting with the right operator. The development side's hard, and you need to go with the right developer and have the right understanding of what you are getting into. But the key is having the operator in early. And that's what And that's why I joined Moda, because I know it is absolutely from day actually one operations are looking at every scheme I get brought into now and to look at from a funding point of view or anything else. Operations have already looked at it. And I think it's really important to be joined up on that side of things, because if you can't let it, or it's not going to last 10 years, or it's not going to be in the right place, or you've not designed it right, or you've not got the right unit mix, I think that's extremely tough. At the end of the day, what we're trying to produce is go back to, I remember back in my early banking days, no one would actually lend on operational hotels. Why? Because they didn't know what the rent was, how much rent you were going to get. We went to 25-year leases. But it took probably the crisis to understand that a 25-year lease doesn't mean anything if the operator goes actually bust. Yeah. And I don't know.
CVAs, it's been such a well-documented issue, hasn't it, in terms of what's your lease worth when the tenant just CVAs?
Well, it's not. Is the simple answer. And I think people got very stuck into that long-term. There's certain things that work very well, and long-term income and growth is great. And that's the beauty of kind of real estate. But it's funny how the world has completely about circled and gone to much more operational and looking at the operator and looking at the demand and looking at the fundamentals of real estate. Not just building a building, taking a lease from someone and going, oh, it's worth this. That's not what actually real estate's about in my kind of book and experience. It's more understanding what's the underlying is, what the demand is, and what the length of term of that building and that actually life is. It's quality.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The attractiveness of operational real estate and the fact that the fundamentals will always come true within your income, whereas obviously at least by definition is more separate.
And you look at it, and I am going back a couple of years here, well before you guys were involved in the sector. I remember looking at hotels when I was back kind of lending, and an operational hotel was valued off 7.5%, 8% because it was operational, because no one could underpin the rent. No one could tell whether. But if you put that same hotel on a lease with 1.5 times cover on the rent, it was suddenly valued off 4.5%. Yeah. You can't tell me the risks.
The Premier Inns back in the day,
the risk is exactly the same. But the key is, though, that over years, those yields got closer, and actually operational came in at the same actual level as lease, to the point where leases started being pushed aside. I like the operational model. I think you look at where actually retail's got to go. And I'm a massive supporter of the retail guys. They've had a tough gig. The model's got to change. Business rates and things have got to be adjusted for them. It's an important factor. It's an important factor in the community. It's an important factor for us generally in the UK. Having places to go, enjoying those places and not fearful that they're going to disappear the following day. It creates the community side, and that's what we'll also try and do at Moda, bring in those services that actually work for the communities as well. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It is about creating value. It's about creating long-term value. It's about hitting the important factors, and how do you create long-term value? That is really very much about getting the right product in the right location and having a management structure that people want to be part of.
Yep. And obviously you've had kind of 30 years experience in the sector. So how do you feel that the priorities of investors have perhaps shifted over that period of time?
We had a great conversation outside on this, didn't we? And I'm not going to give in to the last question yet. I think it's become very financially driven.
Yeah.
Rather than the actual underpin and looking beyond that 3, 4, 5 year investment horizon of most funds or investors. Back when I started this, there was the long-term money and there was the very short-term money. People who could buy something and turn it, and there was the people who held it. Yeah. Now there's a lot of people with different lengths of funds, different kind of capital. And I think that's what's actually made the market more interesting, somewhat better, but somewhere a lot harder to actually navigate. Yeah. As I say, I think the fundamentals should always remain the same. How good's your property? Where is it? What does it cater for? And that actually ultimately drives price. Financial modelling is one of my bugbears. I think everybody has to have it. Everybody has to do it. You have to, if you're developing, you have to know what your cost is. You have to know all these things. But I think the massive reliance to hit returns is incredibly tough, especially in the market now. And the people who'll end up making money now are the people who can get in early on the right schemes and actually take a little bit of a view that maybe the returns aren't hitting their optimum now, but in 4 or 5 years' time when a building finishes or they're ready to actually sell it, if you look at the forward yield curves and things, do you believe you're going to get 25, 50 points of yield hardening? I think it's a reasonable bet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
And then in terms of the kind of macro factors, obviously interest rates, inflation, geopolitics, how do you feel that has perhaps affected investment appetite? As we've seen
in every downturn and every cycle, they are the biggest influences on real estate. If you look at your phone in the morning and you look at the kind of listed sector, real estate listed sector, and it's all actually red in the morning, the next thing you do is look at the news and see actually why. And the typical, it's not a real estate factor. Everything is affected by, it could actually be a headline in a newspaper saying that something's happened. We are incredibly reactive at the moment. And typically, if something happens, the markets jump. And then if you look at it over the next week, there isn't any news. It just filters back to where it was. We're just very reactionary at the moment. I think it's even more reactionary and more actually linked to headlines and headlines, movements, interest rates than kind of ever. If interest rates don't actually go up now, everybody will be running for kind of investment again. If the government can say, if the Bank of England can say, we're going to peak at 5 3/4 in January next year, everybody will be dusting off their books and out now. It's the uncertainty that actually kills markets, and that's the period of time we've found ourselves in now, and probably for about a year now.
Yeah, and interesting, I think, with inflation in particular, the energy cost of living crisis, is that, actually that's where BTR or any of the kind of rental sectors really outperform, because you're expanding that catchment of people that you're appealing to, because more people are driven into those categories that would perhaps be looking to get on the ladder or looking to, even for co-living, looking to rent bigger spaces, having to come back to smaller spaces but have location as their kind of key driver. But with rental growth, that kind of strengthens the messaging.
It does, and you guys can probably answer the question better than I can, because I'm not in that market. I'm obviously a little bit longer in the tooth and wanting an easier life, shall we say, living-wise. What do you guys look for? What do you want out of something? Are you location-driven?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely, I think.
So if you can find the right product in the right location and it's on the affordable level and you've got great facilities and that's what's actually driving your decision-making. It's more locationally driven than it probably is anything else, I would have thought.
Definitely. I think as well that emphasis on amenities as well, because what we also forget is that actually when we went to university, student halls and what there was to offer was so different. So when you started getting out into the rental market, you weren't looking for a gym in your building or anything like that, because that was something you were not used to. Whereas now, when people are coming through these second, third generation student blocks where they've got incredible amenities, this is something that people get used to. And it starts...
I feel sorry for them.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't carry on like...
Yeah, and it starts becoming a kind of expectation when they move on to the next rental category or wherever they're moving on to next. So it makes sense for things like co-living to emerge, because actually people are willing to sacrifice a bit of space in order to have those amenities, because that's actually what they're used to.
Changing norms.
Yeah.
It is, and it is a changing market, and people, when I look at the student accommodation now, and we are starting a platform up, it was documented the other day in the press, because we see being able to bring our learnings from BTR, customer service, as you touched on. A lot of the people who started off at Moda, we couldn't find people who'd done BTR. There was no managers of BTR who were there. So what did we go to? We went to try and find people who'd done student, because it was the closest. Realised that doesn't really work to translate into BTR. So we ended up with people who did hotels. So now, sat in the back of operations are all these hotel and student people to do BTR. From that, what are we going to translate into student when we start? And we've got 3 or 4 sites ready to go at the moment on student. What are we going to translate? We know there's some really good operators out there with really good kit. We know there's a demand still. What are we going to hit? We're going to do all the good stuff. We're going to keep the quality, but we're going to really work on the lifestyle side of things. It's going to be very lifestyle dominated, very tech dominated. What do students want? I'm not sure they want every amenity under the sun. What they want is to be able to plug and play and have a very safe, fun, community-led environment. And so we're going to take our management learnings from BTR, our customer service excellence there, bring that across into student and translate it across into the way that students, we actually believe, want it to actually be. You talk about co-living is a great step in the right location.
Yeah.
Really good step. We were going to concentrate quite hard on it. Planning is incredibly hard to actually get. We have got a couple of schemes that we are working up at the moment. I really like it as an interim. Is there going to be enough to set up a platform for us? I don't know, but it fits very nicely in the cities that we are concentrated on. BTR's then actually next in actual line. Really nice. We've obviously got a great underlying there. Most of the stuff we have done so far you would put at the upper end of the market. Going forward in the future, are we going to do much more of that? I wouldn't have thought so. I think it'll be much more. It's not going to be down market. It's going to be have the quality, but it might be amenity a little bit lighter because there's only so much high-end product you can put into the UK. Then we look at single family. We've got the platform with Aries. That's starting to put actual money out of the ground now, and buildings are coming out of the ground now. I really like that single family market. We are the UK. We do like our own stairs. And it's just catering for that whole thing. And hopefully retirement works at the end of that, but we'll do retirement for rent. It'll be actually US retirement for a rent model. The difficulties is, as you probably know from spending a lot of time in this, is student lets up very quickly on a term time. Co-living tends to let up very quickly. BTR takes a little bit longer. Single family takes up a little bit longer, and retirement takes a lot longer.
Yeah.
So but the returns, you find tenants stay longer in single family and retirement than they probably do in co-living. So it's about matching the investments, and that's why I like the multi-use a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I know we touched on this, and you had some really interesting things to say about the fact that obviously real estate is not isolated from the kind of broader financial markets. It'd be good for the audience to hear that as well.
Yeah, I say it's not. It's become more and more aligned.
Yeah.
And it is a very proven investment sector across many different sectors now. I think when I came into it, it was basically pension funds and high net worth individuals with a couple of listed companies. Now there's quite a large listed market. It shouldn't be quite as many companies in it as there is, but there's that. There's obviously the pension funds. There's obviously the high net worths and the big kind of family offices. But then you go into the sovereign wealth, you go into the private equity guys, you go into the international sector. It's really now much more of an international multi-investor kind of market, which is obviously dominated by not just UK economics, but also global economics, global politics, UK politics, everything else. And that's where we are at the moment, where people are making decisions looking into the UK and going, do I really want to invest here? And I think there is a lot of movements, but that sheer volume of money, the different types of money coming in, has made it more complicated, but actually better, I think, for the overall economy. And certainly for us as Moda, we will look at that longer term money now, and that could come from the UK or it could come from overseas.
I think that's super important, isn't it? Understanding the new capital inflows that we've got. I think Harris Associates in particular, we're lucky to have the great partnership with Edmund Tye and everything that's coming from that. It's a super exciting time in the sector, because I think what you're also going to get with this new capital entering the sector is a bit more healthy competition, which has its own benefits, I think, particularly from bringing stuff forward.
I agree. It's a very different feeling in the market at the moment. I think we've had a tough 18 months. This week feels better than it did last week, which is probably better than it did a month ago. There seems to be a little bit more kind of certainty, but I think the different types of capital, the different sources of capital, certainly add to being able to keep the market going along rather than everybody off. I think we've had those weeks where everybody's just taken a step off. I think there is struggles across other sectors. I'd still buy the right office building in the right location, but I'd be a little bit more nervous about one slightly in the wrong location at the moment, or size, or whatever it is. Retail's had its ups and downs over the years. I remember being at college and I remember doing valuation class, and retail you valued at 5%, offices you valued at 7%, and sheds were 10%. You look at it now, it's probably gone the absolute other way around, and BTR's probably slipped in and PBSA have slipped in underneath that.
Yeah.
It always will evolve dependent on the type of capital. Did we overcook it on the back of interest rates? Yeah, of course we did. But that's actually normal. If you can throw a return and the world is growing and rents are growing, people are always going to cook it. It works in a model.
What's your process for identifying and selecting investment partners? Just obviously ticket size is great, but it's obviously not the be all and end all.
You learn that very quickly.
Yeah.
For us, it's all about relationship. And to be honest, in all my years of advisory, it's always been about relationship with people and the investor or investors. I've got to say the kind of public markets taught actually me a lot about that, being out on the road with a number of companies, being able to sit into pitches to international investors across the globe. It was really interesting hearing what kind of questions investors asked. And it gave you a great insight to how long they were in for it, what their drivers were. And I've got to say, looking at it with a pure kind of Moda hat on now, having taken off my kind of advisor hat and trying to do it with absolutely everybody and being a little bit more focused about it. For us, it's all about a long-term relationship, someone we can work with. We want to be really open with people. I've spent a lot of time in my life advising people, writing down what criteria people need to hit to invest and all this kind of stuff, and you try and put it in a box. I reckon people have stayed in the box. Out of the 100 times I've done it, I reckon people have stayed in the box about 4 times. Even simple things, people find alternatives, or they find good deals, or they find that the market switches in 2 years' time and it doesn't fit in that box anymore. Yeah. Therefore, that's the kind of investor that we actually need in the longer term, is the people who want to grow, who want to grow with you, understand the market, will be incredibly open book, and I don't think there's any other way of actually doing it. You've got to create that relationship. Yes, ticket size is important, but it's more about the desire to actually be in the sector, the desire to sit alongside you and really understand whereabouts you're going. A lot of trust on actually both sides, and just understand how process works.
That's what I was going to say. That open book trust element is obviously just so essential.
It's the only way you can afford. And after being in this industry as long as I have, the number of platforms I've seen, been involved with, set up, whatever it is, and you're going with this great idea that it's all going to be massive and we're going to load ourselves up. So many of them do 1 or 2 projects rather than the 10 everybody was really excited about. And that could be no fault of anybody, by the way. That could just be an economic change. It could be anything. But that's what is the key. How do you put together the ideal platform in terms of the longer term?
Yeah, it's interesting as well, actually, because our founder Jonathan always says that these type of long-term investment relationships are actually like a marriage, and you've got to get on with them, and you've actually got to see a future with them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's so important not to rush that element of it. Make sure that everyone's on the same page, there's the same expectation. As you say, things do change, but the fundamentals of that relationship and the expectation is set out at the beginning.
Absolutely. And I think that's absolutely key. And we've been really lucky. We have got partners now, even through our growth stage at the start of this journey, who we will do further business with because we really enjoy them. They really have supported us. They've put the money where actually the mouth is at times when it's been tougher than it probably should be. Those relationships are across the equity and the debt side now, and now we're in that establishment thing and it's growth time. We actually want to do more with them across all those sectors.
And I suppose that when you're talking about how you manage your ongoing relationships, I think you can implying there that there's, once you've built up that trust, there's a willingness to do more, and that's how you almost just go from strength to strength.
The more kind of honest and the more communication you have in most things, relationships or business, it makes it easier most of the time. As long as people know what's going on and you say, we've got this project, it's slightly outside the remit, but we really like it because of X, Y, and Z, come and see it with us, and you walk around it and they go, yeah, but I don't like this and this, and you can solve that for them. It works. If you can't solve it for them, you understand and you move on. It's about having that early look rather than spending half your life doing it.
Agreed. It takes a lot of time, effort and resource in building these relationships up. So obviously once they're up and running, it's in everyone's interest to try and keep them going as long as possible.
And I think that's been one of the biggest frustrations I've seen in my 30 years of people spending an awful lot of time getting into these relationships and lending relationships or banking relationships or whatever it is, an awful lot of time setting it up, and then it doesn't go anywhere. And I've got to say that from a personal side as well, the biggest bit of enjoyment I've got, apart from working with people I'm working with now and being part of a family business, is I can now follow them through. As an advisor, you set it all up and then everybody went off having fun and you sat there and moved on to the next deal, as you guys know. Actually being able to follow it through and live with it is going to be great fun.
So just moving on to the build to rent market insights and obviously coupling that with your financial background and experience. From the other real estate sectors that you've worked in, are there any kind of market behavioural patterns that you've recognised are similar and which have allowed you to apply to build to rent, or is build to rent kind of its own beast?
I think it's its own beast. Yeah, you can look at hotels, you can look at student that you've done, you can look at real estate. All translates, doesn't it? But I think it's kind of own beast when you speak to actually Johnny Caddick about setting up the single family. We'd done BTR. He thought, setting up a single family, what is it? Just a house and you put someone in it. It's taken years to get that kind of optimised in terms of the service offering, what you're trying to do, because you're not trying to do BTR. Yeah. So I think it's got its own arms and legs. I think you take a lot of things from kind of other sectors, as you do in a lot of things.
I think you mentioned earlier your original kind of source of employment was student, and then that migrated into hospitality. I think there's similarities and differences within both of those, which BTR becomes almost hybrid of, and I can see why you took that.
And it's a massive learning curve. I think that front of house has to be more hotels. Yeah. Even though you've got people, hopefully for a year, 2 years, 3 years, I would hope, you've got to provide that level of service because there's a lot of very good operators out there. There's a lot of very good actual buildings coming online. It's a very positive market.
I'm such a believer in that. I think from the time I've worked in build to rent, it's and watching the good operators, there's the underlying real estate, which is really important in terms of product you're producing. But I think equally as important is the service and the community that gets offered on that. And that's what drives your rental premium.
And if you get the community right and you get the engagement to people, that's the key. For us, the quality is quality. A lot of people are building quality. I don't think there's a difficulty on it now. You're not looking at different operators going, that's a terrible product. Yeah. It'll have a market, it'll have a rental point, as long as you can add the quality of management, the quality of service. And as I've said, for us, it's about adding that ESG piece on, adding how do you save people money? How do you really work with them to help their bills, help their management, help everything else, and you provide services that they want. It's having apps nowadays and everything's there that people can actually see it. Mm-hmm. And I think that engagement is the key, and we do that very well.
Yeah. Obviously, you've built a fantastic network throughout your career working at the various banking institutions. With exposure to all the global capital you've dealt with, going forward, who do you think could be the key protagonists in the BTR and then the wider living space?
A lot of people want to get into it. A huge amount of people want to get into it. But the key is, as we touched on earlier on, the ideal partner is someone who really wants to do it, who wants to understand this is not buying a shed. And I'm not taking anything away from guys doing sheds, because I've done a lot of them and I love the market, and it's still, I think, a very buoyant market. I think it's probably been kind of oversold now. But I think BTR takes it to another level in terms of there has to be a huge amount of trust on modelling, has to be a huge amount of trust on your operations and your delivery. It's a lot more complicated. These are typical 20, 30, 40-storey towers. These are not little buildings. There's a lot of expertise goes into them and a lot of engagement required. Therefore, it's the investor who is ready for the journey. And whilst there's a lot of people saying they actually want to be a part of it, I think there's only a number who really understand it.
And I think that's important to understand as well, because going forward, you talking about how long it takes to build these relationships. Build to rent is by definition something which takes a deep level of understanding and trust. So it almost just compounds further that you're, realistically speaking, the partnerships are going to be there's going to be less of them almost, but they're going to be more. They're going to be stronger as a result.
That's what you got to do, because if you have to reinvent it on every single project, you can't go deal by deal, I don't think, on BTR, PBSA, if you want to do it in scale. You've got to really try, and if you do a deal with someone, you've got to be aiming to do 3, 4, 5 plus.
Yep.
And yeah, exactly. In terms of your aims, in terms of the long-term financial strategy, and what are some of the kind of primary goals and objectives that Moda Living have got planned over the next few years?
Well, obviously BTR to expand
Yeah.
further. We think we've got a great foothold in it. We've got more product coming through. We've got 1,000 beds completing by the end of the year. Another 1,000 beds, one up in Glasgow, one down in Hove, which are very exciting. It's always exciting opening things. So that'll take us to 7 fully operational assets. We've got a pipeline extending to about 24,000 homes. With the single family, we'll be doing 1,000 a year. 1,000 units a year. That's all starting to come out. You can see it in the press. That's really exciting. PBSA, we've got 2 or 3 projects we want to get into the ground in probably March, April next year. So we're in throes of a capital partner on the PBSA side. It's been announced in the press, a kind of regeneration in Birmingham alongside Aviva. These are all really exciting projects and things. So the key for us as Moda is to carry on and do actually more. The key for myself, Johnny and Guy and the investment team is really very much finding these long-term partners who want to go with us on the next stage of the journey. We've done the growth bit. We've done the initial growth and the initial proving. Now it's the time for kind of growth and kind of working on the back of that.
And obviously you focused on the end-to-end delivery with this openness to finding new capital. What kind of structures have immediately been quite compelling, or is it a general more openness to what's on offer?
I think in this market you've got to be relatively open to things. Obviously we could all sit here and say we love this structure. Everybody, the big investors that we actually need to target here, have their own structures. Let's get it right. They know how to invest. It's how we fit within that. Yes, there are certain things that we definitely want. Are we comfortable taking risk on options and spending money to get planning on sites if we know we've got the right investment partner afterwards? Yeah, of course we are. That's what Caddick and Moda have done all the way through. They'll put their money down in order to get the right sites. The key is now making sure we can do more of that, knowing that we can get it funded.
Just in terms of, it'd be interesting, I think, to understand a little bit in terms of the timelines of how you're going to approach expansion into the living sectors. Is there an emphasis on build to rent specifically at the moment with 2025, 2026 to be more PBSA, or is it a little bit more complicated than that? I suppose
it's a bit more complicated than that at the moment. I think it's much more led by what we're seeing in the market. We've got people out looking at opportunities constantly. We see a lot. We're seeing more now than we've seen for a while in terms of inbounds. And that might be developers who are a little bit stuck, can't raise money. That's going to be the big thing in the market, as you're seeing, I'm sure, which is developers have got great sites. They've probably got it planning and they're sat there and they can't raise the finance because they're not a Moda, or they're not a Vita, or they're not a Get Living. It's quite hard to raise actual money at the moment for kind of everybody. I think there's going to be more of those coming out. We're also an operational company. Let's get it right. The underlying thing of Moda, there's a development arm, but we're also an operator. So we will start looking at more pure operational opportunities. But when you look at it, BTR, we're looking at a whole pipeline of that. PBSA, we really want to kick on with because we think there is a brilliant market. You only have to read actually the press on the amount of beds required in certain cities. But again, you've got to be incredibly targeted. And that's what I've found a lot in BTR recently, actually. I've seen analysis on a lot of towns, cities, and there is prime cities. And if it's not prime, it's very hard to find. It really, to actually fund. And we've seen some really top cities, including one me and you are very close to. It's very hard to fund something. Not because it's not a great scheme, but you can't prove the rent. And if you can't prove the rent, how are you going to underwrite? And we actually did it on the Lexington at Liverpool, and I'm sure the guys won't actually mind me kind of saying, we actually did get Liverpool, slightly nervous of Liverpool in terms of BTR, relative, certainly the highest market rent in actually Liverpool. We were nervous about it a little bit because the rents we were underwriting were unproven, absolutely flown. So I'm sure if we went into these other cities, it would drive the rents, but this market is different to what it was 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah, and I think especially when you're entering new markets, I'm always a big fan of the location and focusing in on that and making sure that you understand the city and that site you end up choosing, you can really get behind and believe in the product that you're going to create.
Yeah, listen, speaking to the guys who are doing this every day at our place, they're looking at a lot of sites. The kind of analysis is very strong. You've got to know the cities. PBSA, slightly different. Would we like to do them in all the prime cities we have BTR? And yeah, it would help having a Moda brand sat across student if you've already got probably one of the best BTR schemes in the town. The quality is certainly unknown. But there is other towns in the UK on a student demand side, when you look at the underlying strength of the university and the supply-demand dynamics in that city, that actually work extremely well. You've got to be very focused at the moment because the capital isn't there for everything. People do want to drive it, but you also have to hit the returns, which is the hard bit.
How are you thinking of approaching that? It's obviously Moda's got such a clear brand, and purchasing operational real estate from which has been delivered by another partner, that's going to create its own challenges.
It's going to be very selective, put it that way.
Yeah.
I think we would need to be. But as I said earlier on, there's only so much of the top of the market product you can do. We've got a couple of schemes in Birmingham. One's finished at the Mercian. Great Charles Street is coming out of the ground. Is there room in Birmingham for another top-end Moda? I'm not so sure. It's fantastic product. If you've ever been, it is an incredible building. But, we're also doing something out at Edgbaston, which is slightly lower price. Still very high quality. I like that. It's having different price points throughout the thing. I'm not sure the BTR we will look at, as I say, is going to be all what you've seen from actually Moda. So far, the quality will be still the same. The offering will be the same, but will be slightly smarter around the kind of amenity side, I think.
Yeah.
And then in terms of, it's quite interesting because obviously Moda has such a strong brand name in the market. And I'm sure there's been an incredible amount of investment into the marketing around that, how you market to consumers, making the sign-up process really seamless and really showing off the buildings. But it's also really interesting to understand the importance of that B2B marketing in order to attract investment.
Yeah.
And what type of things you lean into in order to assist that story, or at least tell that story to investors looking to partner with you.
Yeah. I'm very lucky. I've got a lot of people in Moda who are very good at this. As I said, I understand my bit fairly well.
Yeah.
We tend to, when we go and see investors, they're all very interested in Moda and what Moda does. And, we can get people in from the development side because that's what they live and breathe. From the operational side, that's where we live and breathe. And when you look at the reach the operational side now has in social media, in marketing and everything else, it works across into that. They can produce all the stats in the world. They can do everything. But fundamentally, it comes down to, are you an operator? Are you a developer that people want to back? The marketing side is, I think we've got a juggernaut. I think they've done it brilliantly well to get the Moda brand to actually where it is. The key is retaining that quality and retaining that brand. As we all know, things can go south very quickly and it doesn't really take a lot to hurt a brand. I think it's been built in a very robust manner, which people actually know and trust.
Yeah.
The marketing across it, I think at the moment is pretty simple in the fact that we have stats. We're constantly speaking to people. I know the team spends an awful lot of time conducting research and understanding what we're good at, what we're actually bad at. And, the key actually for us is that social media and the word of mouth.
Yeah.
In kind of cities. The more word of mouth you have, the better you actually fill up a building. And from an investor side, all they're looking at is how quickly have you let up that actual building, what's your operational look like, and what's your kind of ESG, really is the bottom line.
So it feeds into one another in a way.
Absolutely. I don't think you can look at it in a single track at all. I think when you look at a presentation to an investor, it all switches around as to what they actually want to look at first. ESG has gone from probably towards the back of a book has gone to probably second page in a book now in terms of how you drive it. Luckily, Moda have been always at the forefront of that, winning wellness awards, winning things like that. They've always been around that community, and the building side is the building side. You have to do it in the way that it works. That's all fine. And then probably financial moves further down now, because it's more about building the story, the B2B marketing piece, all that kind of social media, everything kind of fits in earlier now in the presentation than it probably did.
I think so in terms of with Build to Rent and the narrative is so important for what you're selling, not just to the business to customer, but it's business to business as well, isn't it?
It is, absolutely. And we've just got to do it in the right manners. But I think the key is to look at across it on the whole thing. You can't just pick off individual areas now.
What's a full story, and you've got to give people that full picture.
And I think that's right. And I think that's one of the big advantages here. As I said at the outset, we're a developer who has got the operator attached, and we're all integrated. So having that integrated, look at it from day one. When you look at a site and operations, look at it and go, I love that. Or we can't let that, doesn't work. Or we need to focus on 1 beds, 2 beds, 3 beds. We can't get actually the planning on that basis. Can we shift it? No. Okay, let's put it aside. We really like that. Go at that one. So having that integral and then having that operations, when you put a spade in the ground and it starts at that point, engaging with the community, talking about what we're going to do, marketing, ramp up is really key. And investors looking at it from the financial point like that.
Brilliant. So we've come to our question that we like to ask all of our guests, which is, if you could reinvent anything in the real estate sector, what would it be?
Well, we had a conversation about this earlier, and I think I'll be controversial around this one. Hate IRR. I just hate the whole thing on IRR. Someone in the organisation was telling me a quote from someone the other day who said, you can't eat IRR. Absolutely right. It's just, I think I'm a little bit old school now, but real estate is real estate. And you look at the fundamentals of real estate. Can you build it? Can you make money out of it? I've seen very clever people work on models for years and years to make an IRR work. And you move it by a month, 2 months, 3 months, it makes an IRR not work, but the equity multiple work. I get it. I get people have to have financial targets, but so many things can move IRR that it's incredible. Look at it on a fundamental basis. Does it work? Then the IRR should be the secondary consideration, not the primary. It's got to tick every box.
I completely agree. I think there's always that phrase, paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
You write models, and we have brilliant modelling and very good people around it, but I've lived around it for 30 years. And the modelling's got more and more complex. To throw out a single number that people make a decision based on.
You've got to take a balanced view.
You've got to take a view, and coming back to the partner choice, that's what we want. They will have IRR targets because the market has them, but we need someone we can talk properly to about those inputs into that model as the market moves to earlier points. The markets move over. If you're in a relationship for hopefully 10 years, the market is going to move. You can't, models break. If your model breaks on the back of 1.5% interest rate movement, it's going to break. The key for me is, yes, IRR's here to stay, but it is a fundamental bugbear of mine when people just quote IRRs.
I think that goes back to as well the open lines of communications that are so important between the developer and the operator and the investor, and making sure that people aren't getting too held up on specific metrics.
If it doesn't work on a financial basis, it doesn't work. But I think you can do that before you start looking at analysis on kind of IRRs. You have a general feeling on it.
Yeah. It's almost overcomplicating in a way, rather than, as you say, going back to the fundamentals of, does this work and do we believe in it and can we take a view on it?
Especially in the market now, as we touched on earlier on, if you've got a student building in Manchester, a year ago, PBSA Prime Manchester, 4.25, probably. It's now probably 5.25, I would guess at. You do that through on an exit yield now on a model. It's probably on a good scheme, really good scheme, it's probably putting you in the early double digits, probably at about 12 or so, 12, 13%. I would guess. in 4 years' time, if you look at where the forward curves are going and you think interest rates are going to peak and come off to probably in 4 or 5 years' time, high threes, 4%, are you telling me that 150 points on interest rate fall and a lot more certainty on market isn't going to take 25, 50 basis points off your yield?
Yeah.
So modelling it now for now is... Yeah, that's the beauty of real estate, and that's what I've enjoyed in real estate, that things do actually change and people have to make decisions, and that's why I see this market as a huge opportunity, actually, if you do your analysis right and jump into bed with the right partners.
So thank you so much, Michael. It's been wonderful talking to you and hearing all your insights across your career, how you think that network and being part of a team and understanding your team, the key drivers in being successful, and not only being part of successful companies, but being successful yourself. And you've had such an amazing journey that I think is really inspiring to people listening and watching. So thank you so much for joining us and giving your fantastic insights.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. As I said, it's always nice doing these things and having a discussion about current topics as well as what's actually gone on, because another massive passion of mine is I've been incredibly lucky to have what I've got, where I've worked to. And yeah, as I said, my childhood was incredible in terms of sport. Coming into a business place I never thought I'd get to. And that's been thanks to a lot of people being in the right place at the right time and living a journey. And I'm very passionate about giving people the right opportunities. I'm very passionate about inclusiveness and things. I'm someone who grew up with a speech impediment. I could hardly speak when I was 13, 14. I now do things like this and I enjoy it.
Amazing.
I never thought I would have done it. You don't know where people are. You don't know what backgrounds they're from. You don't know anything. Yeah. I like finding that out.
No, it's been incredibly interesting talking to you. And so thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining us for this 6th episode with Michael Old from Moda Living. It was a fantastic episode that really went through not only his journey from more of a financial background into Moda Living that got him here today, and the advice that he would give people in terms of stepping into a managerial role, listening to the people that are working alongside you and for you, learning their strengths and really using that to the best of your ability. So it's absolutely worth a listen to and a watch. He's been fantastic today. We've learned a lot and we know you will too. Make sure you subscribe to our channel for more episodes and updates. That will be on YouTube, Apple Music, Spotify, and we'll be sharing snippets on LinkedIn as well.